Well, thank you again for having me this morning. I'm Dr. Sam Clovis. I last served in the Trump administration and the Department of Agriculture as a senior White House advisor to the Department of Agriculture of the United States. And born and raised in the middle part of our country, right in the breadbasket, the wheat breadbasket of America. And I wanted to talk to you today about the challenges of feeding the world in the year 2050. That was our goal when we came into the administration in Washington, D.C., was to turn the entire attention of the agricultural world toward the feeding of the world in the year 2050. We think that is an incredible challenge, and we wanted to think strategically. So we were looking over the horizon to see what all of the factors might be that we will have to be facing and the challenges that we'll be facing as we go forward. I was most interested in the colleague that just spoke about the challenges that we face with environmental activism, and I'll cover that here in just a moment. But what I wanted to talk about today basically was how in the world are we going to feed 9.7 billion people that will populate this earth in the year 2050. 2050 is only 27 growing seasons away from now. And right now we have a world population that is a great portion of it has food insecurity. They do not have access to the nutrients that are required for sustaining life. And we simply do not have the agricultural infrastructure in the world that will allow us to feed the world. We look at it from the United States perspective, of course, because that's where we are, and we are a great nation that produces a great deal of the agricultural products of the world. We are blessed with the great soil that we have through most of our country, and fully 52% of our land mass is dedicated to agriculture. One of the great challenges that we face, as many other countries do, is the fact that we are now looking at a very difficult labor situation where we see more and more urbanization and fewer people remaining in the rural areas of the country. And thus our labor force is diminished as greatly as well. It is very difficult for us to attract people into agricultural labor because, one, it is very difficult and very stressful. The other part is that we simply do not have the population to support that. Even with immigration, and we have a tremendous amount of immigration into this country. In fact, the growth of this nation has been, over the last several decades, has been fully devoted to the influx of immigrants into our country. Even that has not been helpful with assuaging our labor shortfalls. The other thing we are dealing with in this country is that we already dedicate a great deal of the land mass to agriculture. And I just want to cover some of those statistics as we look at some of the things that go forward. One of the challenges that we face in the world today is that we have decreased child mortality rates, which means more and more children are surviving and growing into their teen years and adult years. This puts tremendous pressure on the economies of those developing nations where they may not have the jobs available for people that are in the growing populations. We also see that people are living longer. I'm certainly a classic case of that. I went through a tremendous medical scare here 4 years ago and survived that, and now feel as healthy as I've ever been. Even though I spend my life in a wheelchair, it is still I have a very strong and flourishing life because of modern medical care. We see that those population numbers are changing. We also see that affluence is increasing across the world. So that puts a greater demand not only on the population numbers, but also on the fact that there will be higher and higher demands for protein. This becomes a real challenge because there are very few sources of protein today. Mostly we do that through the consumption of meat products. And yet we're going to have to look at alternatives because we simply cannot raise enough cattle or sheep or chickens or turkeys or any other form of meat protein. Simply cannot find the land or the space to do that. So we have those challenges here as well. And the continent of Africa is probably the one area of the world where we have the most troubling issues. This is where we have rapidly growing populations. We have the lack of developed agricultural infrastructure. We are barely past subsistence agriculture, and we need to get to the point where the continent of Africa is able to produce excess crops, excess capacity, so that they may enter the market, the free market world, and then be able to feed not only themselves, but then help feed other parts of the world. We see a tremendous amount of population growth in Africa, certain countries in Southwest Asia, and Central Asia, and Southeast Asia. We see that growth of population there is going to put a lot of pressure on the agricultural producers around the world. We in the United States view this as a particular challenge because we are facing the issues of the fact that we already produce, cover most of our land, and 52% of it is dedicated to agriculture. 700 million acres we have in forestation, and yet we spend almost 100 million acres in corn production, nearly 90 million acres in soybean production, 60-some million acres in wheat production, 11 million acres in rice production, and it goes on down. And we spend a tremendous amount of effort in increasing yields on the land that we use. Unfortunately, in the United States, we put 40% of our corn production, which is the largest crop production that we have, we put that into biofuels. So we run headlong in to this whole issue of dealing with environmental activism and the whole notion of how to find a balance between agricultural production, the entire food chain of what we're trying to do, and running headlong into the environmentalists and those that have taken on climate change as a religion. There are many of us in the United States that are skeptical about the whole notion of anthropogenic global warming. We understand climate change. There's not a farmer in the world that doesn't, because the climate changes every day. And farming is dependent upon the weather. And so we see how those weather trends change, and we see how that affects the agricultural production. But what we're trying to do is find a balance of how we're going to go ahead and produce the food that we need, and to go from there. One of the things that I think that is important for us in talking about this is the whole notion, if we're talking about a global issue and a strategic issue, is water. I think water is one of the most important aspects of agriculture. We worry about water protection. We worry about the protection of watersheds. We worry about the protection of our fisheries. We worry about the pollution that ends up in our oceans and affects those fisheries. And those are the things that we are trying to get on top of. And one of the things that we're looking at is a tremendous push toward precision agriculture. This is where we are able to use technology to go out and be able to apply our artificial nutrients, our treatments to our crop and soil in a way that is does not affect the watershed and does not affect our water quality. Water quantity is an issue as well, but we're trying to work on that. So we look around the world and we see that that is one of the big issues associated with agriculture, is how do we find water to be able to grow crops, because it takes water, moisture to grow crops, and to grow crops effectively and grow them well. So this is one of the challenges that we see around the world, is how do we go out and get farmers to be able to have access to water, to be able to apply it to their crops, to be able to have the ability to provide nutrients to their crops, and then be able to retain those nutrients in the soil. What are the farming techniques that we are able to give to people so that they are able to produce in excess, so that that food can feed the urban parts populations of the world, and also then be able to enter the markets that we have out there. I thought that I would open a can of worms today talking about the whole issue of climate change, but I'm glad my colleague in front of me did open that up, because I think that's one of the great challenges that we have in agriculture today. We certainly face it in the United States, and I know I've been following the regulations coming out of the EU and several of the countries in Europe. You do not have the land mass that we do to produce crops. So we end up running into a lot of the same issues, particularly in our western lands, where forestation is one of our great crops that we have in abundance, but we are unable to take advantage of harvesting that crop for profit. One of the things I think is important is to take a look at the importance of international markets. It certainly is important to the United States. And one of the things that we would like to be able to do is to make sure that all countries have access to agricultural markets, so that commodities can flow freely from one continent to another, one country to another, and be able to do that without the hindrances of regulations and over-regulating the agricultural industry. I don't think in America that farmers are cast as bad people. I think that people that produce right now, the meat production people in America, are being villainized, and that is unfortunate, because the fact is that our diet is made up predominantly, or protein comes from meat, and we do that. Now there are many advances being made in using vegetation and aquacultures for the production of protein. But right now, protein in most parts of the world is carried out by meat. I want to wrap up here quickly. I know that I'm running out of time, and I want to get us back on schedule here, but I want to finish by talking about, what do we do about this? What do we do about the challenges of environmental activists that are using climate change as a brickbat to bash those of us who are involved in agriculture around the world? It's unfortunate that those people, many of them, do not understand or even care about how we have to work to produce the food that people eat in the world. And so what I wanted to do, and hopefully in the question and answer period, is to be able to get to that point where we will be able to answer questions about how do we deal with the activism of those who are out there using climate change as a brickbat to bash agricultural production. I have a little bit more I could say here, but I'll wait, and we'll get back on schedule, and hopefully we'll be able to go through some question and answer. And I'm very happy to have the opportunity. Thank you for having me this morning on this international Zoom call. I think it's quite remarkable. Thank you very much.